right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Miriam Sobe. I'm a news anchor and reporter for CBS Radio here in Chicago, and I'll be moderating this session. Since we have a very small amount of time and we'd like to keep this as engaging as possible, we're just going to jump into what this session is. So if you wandered in here and you don't know what this is about, we are going to be talking about Muslims in America and how they're facing a lot of negative press, particularly when it relates to events in the Middle East. What we'd like to hear from our panelists today is what role does the media play in fanning these flames of negativity, and how can those negative ideas be countered? With us here we have Dalia Fahmy. She is a professor of political science at Long Island University and a member of the Egyptian Rule of Law Association. She is also frequently called on as a political analyst for various media outlets. Please welcome Dalia. We also have Wajahat Ali. He is a writer and co-host of Al Jazeera America's social media-driven talk show, The Stream. He is the author of the play The Domestic Crusaders and lead author of the investigative report Fear, Inc., The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America. Thank you, Wajahat, for being here. And we also have Yusufi Vali. He is the executive director of the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center, the largest Islamic institution in New England. He dealt firsthand with the media crisis that followed after the Boston Marathon bombing and the shooting of Osama Rahim. Thank you, Yusufi. And last but not least, we have Mehdi Hasan. He is a presenter on Al Jazeera America English, and yesterday launched his new show, Upfront, from Washington, D.C., with an exclusive interview with Edward Snowden. Prior to joining Al Jazeera and moving to the U.S. in March, he was the political director of the Huffington Post in the U.K., the author of 2 books, and is currently also a contributor to The Guardian. So we have an amazing group of panelists, and I'm really excited to get started with this. First, we're going to start with Dalia here, and I wanted to ask her what exactly is Islamophobia? We hear this buzzword a lot these days. Does it really carry any weight? Dalia, can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Sure. So Islamophobia is the unfounded, irrational fear of Muslims or anything having to deal with Islam. This is the definition that the Council on American Islamic Relations came up with, and it also extends to alienating Muslims from civic and public life. But what does this really mean in tangible events that we think about today? When you see a mosque or a school burnt down in Texas, when you see 2 kids in Michigan who, when they're asked if they're Muslim and they respond in the affirmative and they're stabbed, when you see a young Canadian boy who's killed because he's Muslim, these are the long-term after effects of Islamophobia. But how do we get there? Now, Islamophobia is about the propagation of certain myths. And how does this happen? In the media today, if a certain talk show pundit comes on TV and says 40% of Muslims support terrorism, this is a really popular statistic right now. 40% of Muslims support terrorism. So if there are 1.6 billion Muslims in America, in the world, that means 640 million of them have to support terrorism. Now, who are 640 million Muslims? If the population of Egypt is 81 million, and Tunisia is 10, and Morocco is 31, and Libya is 6, and Jordan is 6, and Pakistan is 120, and Indonesia is 140, and all of the Muslims that live in India, then the population of every single one of those countries has to support terrorism, and we know that this is a falsehood. So false narratives that lead to the propagation of myths that ultimately lead to the marginalizations of Muslims from civic and public life is really the heart of Islamophobia. Now, as Muslims, when we tend to think about, well, is this a post-9/11 phenomenon? Is this something new? Well, we all think that this is really just started after 9/11. However, Islamophobia, or the othering of Muslims, is an inherently Western phenomenon that began in Europe. If you think about historically, the first written text that we have in English is the Song of Roland, which is actually celebrates the decimation of Muslims. So things like this, things like the inherent identity formation in the West that was created through an othering of Muslims that began in Europe also bled into identity formation here in the United States, where it first began against the Catholics and then the Jews, but then turns into an inherently Muslim phenomenon. Now, why is it important for us to understand this? We can say, well, historically, this has been the case. But the difference is that today, it's actually permeating into the Muslim mind. Think about it. It permeates into the Muslim mind. How many of us, when we go to the airport and we see a woman in niqab or a man in a jalabiyya, we say, I'm not going to get into that line. It permeates into the way we start to see ourselves, the way we define ourselves. And the reason why it's different today rather than in the past is because we have started to establish a narrative of defining Muslim Americans through the Islamophobic narrative. And that's something that we need to be aware of. That its violence is not just in the myths that it propagates, but its violence today is resulting in a definition of Muslims that is predicated against a false narrative.
Thank you so much, Dalia. And sort of to tag on to that, I wanted to talk to Wajahat a little bit about this. You've done a lot of research into Islamophobia. We always hear that the media is to blame. That's what's pushing this out there. What are your thoughts on this?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. How's everyone doing? Thank you for that robust, ecstatic response. I appreciate it. Can you guys hear me all the way in the back? All right, wonderful. I would like to say assalamu alaikum to the podium that is in front of me and Mehdi. Thank you, podium, for blocking our view. It's a good question. We did a report called Fear Inc., The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America for the Center for American Progress. I spent 6 months researching the Islamophobia Network about 4 years ago. And quite literally, we broke it down to 5 major groups of how a fictitious, inflammatory, exaggerated, hysterical, crazy meme that no one would take seriously, like President Obama is a Muslim. And if he is a Muslim, he eats pork openly, so he's not really that good of a Muslim. And if he is a Muslim, mashallah, he's been elected twice. Assalamu alaikum, ya brother Obama. But it's silly, we laugh about it, but how do memes like this infiltrate the mindset of average Americans who don't necessarily possess a malicious heart towards Muslims, but don't really know anything about Muslims? And media does play a huge role. I want to give you guys quickly the 2 root causes of Islamophobia. If you really strip it down, we did the research. The 2 root causes in America for Islamophobia are the following. Number 1, even though Muslims have been in America since the 1500s, they've come here from West Africa. About a third of the slave trade that was brought here forcibly against its will was Muslim. We are part and parcel of the American narrative. We are part of this soil, all right? Despite that, a poll a couple of years ago from Time magazine said nearly 2/3 of Americans don't know a Muslim. Let that sink in. So number 1, the root cause is ignorance. The second major problem, as mentioned, is media, and specifically media misconceptions and misperceptions of Islam and Muslims. Dalia Mogahad, who's here, I believe, did a fantastic poll for Gallup about 6 years ago. It's like the Gallup poll of 1 billion Muslims. Have you guys heard of it? What people don't realize is they polled Muslims from around the world. Muslims don't hate, quote unquote, our values. It's a reason why they love America. They love our values, they love technology, they love education. When they said, what are the 2 major grievances that you have against the West, whatever the West is, they said, number 1, the hypocrisy of American foreign policy when it comes to our alleged values. And number 2, anyone want to take a guess? The disrespect of Islam and Muslims in mainstream media. So what happens in American media not only shapes domestic policy, but also influences foreign policy and negatively influences and actually helps bolster the narrative of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Quickly, you guys still with me? You guys with me? Yes, great, I love it. Robust, ecstatic crowd. If it bleeds, it leads, all right? Media is neutral. If it bleeds, it leads. If a Muslim's bleeding, it's gonna lead. If a Mormon's bleeding, it's gonna lead. Sensationalism runs the day. And media is often tied to politics as the organ of propaganda. I'll give you a quick example. Let me do history in 30 seconds. 1092, Pope Urban II declares crusades to recapture the Holy Lands against the Muslims, okay? What happens the next century, all of a sudden we see literature, media of the day, portraying Muslims as what? The other and the enemy. Songs of Roland, a famous poem you must have read in English classes. If your son was like me and not a doctor and was an English major, bichara, he must have read it. And basically they rewrote history and said the Muslim army routed Charlemagne's nephew Roland. In fact, in history, it wasn't the Muslims who were the enemy, it was Christian Basques. But because of the political climate, the enemy became what? Muslim. 14th century, Dante's Divine Comedy. You must have read it in the English class you didn't take because you were in engineering class. Who was in one of the bottom rungs of hell being tortured? Anyone know? Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Who else was there? Hazrat Ali. Fast forward, Voltaire, enlightened thinker. We love Voltaire. Voltaire wrote a play about the fanaticism of the Prophet Muhammad. Fast forward the 20th century. I love 80s movies. I'm a product of 80s movies. Who was the major villain in 80s movies? I remember Delta Force. Who saw Delta Force? Chuck Norris was killing our people. And in the 80s, I was like, kill them. And then later on, I'm like, this is very racist. 1994, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I love Schwarzenegger movies. I'm just going to put it out there. Mehdi, by the way, loves terrible action movies also. True Lies. Who did he kill? Muslims who were shooting their gun in the air, and I'm like, kill them. And afterwards, I'm like, this is very racist. Aladdin. Yes, even Aladdin had very racist lyrics. It was common. In 1980s early wrestling, Hulk Hogan's arch nemesis in World Wrestling Federation, anyone know who it was? Yell it out. The Iron Sheikh. And if you get 2 points if you know the Iron Sheikh's finishing move. Camel clutch. Why? Because in the 70s, what do we have? Israel-Palestine conflict, which is still ongoing. We had OPEC. We had in 79 what? The Iranian Revolution. In 80s, you had the conflict again in Palestine. You also had Afghanistan. You had the Iraq War. And the enemy in the 80s and 90s was the Middle Easterner, the brown person, the other. 9/11 happens. And when the two towers hit, the enemy, which was always there, gets reframed. It thus becomes a civilizational conflict. It becomes Islam versus the West. And after 9/11 happened, and I want you guys to really listen to this, the favorability rating of Islam and Muslims a week after 9/11 was higher then than it is now. Let that sink in for a second. Right now, if George W. Bush was running for president, he would not be elected by Republicans because he'd be seen as a Muslim lover. In 2015, we have 5 times as many hate crimes against Muslims than we did 15 years ago. And I want to give you a quick example of how media works. You guys remember the 2010 Ground Zero Mosque campaign that was neither at Ground Zero nor a mosque? You guys remember this in New York? Let me give you a quick example of how it worked. 2010, January, Daisy Khan and a Jewish American member from the JCC went on Fox News' Bill O'Reilly show. Bill O'Reilly was taking a break, Laura Ingraham was substituting. They present the program for Park 51 Community Center, which they mislabeled as Ground Zero. Laura Ingraham on Fox News in January 2010 says, "This sounds like a good idea. I applaud it." Fast forward a couple of months, Pamela Geller, mashallah, Pamela Geller, a fan of Muslims, rebrands specifically and deliberately rebrands the Park 51 Center as what? The mega mosque at Ground Zero on her blog. New York Post interviews her and runs 2 inflammatory articles. The Islamophobia industry pumps in money with think tanks and grassroots groups, and in the summer, a non-issue becomes a local issue, becomes a national issue, becomes an international controversy. Ground Zero Mosque, an act of triumphalism. Who picks up on it? Nearly every single Republican presidential candidate, local officials get elected off of it, and come midterm elections in November 2010, what happens? It goes away. But the result of that manufactured media controversy is a huge spike in anti-Muslim bias. A huge spike in anti-Muslim bias. And you guys are still with me? Give me 30 more seconds, I'll be finished talking, I promise. I don't want to take away from your time. You're here from Mehdi and Yusuf. You guys still with me? Okay. Raise your hands if you've heard these talking points in the last 4 years. President Obama is a Muslim. Okay. Radical Islam is traditional Islam. There's no such thing as a peaceful Muslim. Radical Islam has infiltrated our government. Mosques are Trojan horses. Hamas is hummus. I'm just kidding. No, you guys got you. But I was just saying if you're paying attention. But with the Ground Zero Mosque controversy, people in the Islamophobia industry saw that that media narrative worked. And around that same time, you had a think tank that misdefined Sharia as the legal, military, political doctrine that seeks to supplant the Constitution with Islamic law and the Caliphate. That is a definition of Sharia no Muslim actually believes in. What they also did, and this is important, they misdefined taqiyya. How many people actually know what taqiyya means? Like 2 people, exactly, nerds. No one knows. If you ask a Muslim what taqiyya is, they probably think it's like a new burrito released by Taco Bell with extra guacamole, right? Taqiyya is an old concept which allowed Muslims to actually hide their faith if it was under duress or if your life was under threat. What they said was taqiyya is religiously mandated lying. That Allah says that Muslims in America are supposed to lie. So that what they're saying is this: yes, there are peaceful Muslims, but guess what? Do you know that Muslims believe in taqiyya? So even that peaceful Muslim, that moderate Muslim, might not be a moderate Muslim. He might be Mehdi Hasan. And just to give you, and last thing I'll say, thank you for entertaining me, just to show you how media plays an organ in this, Christopher Bale is an American sociologist, not Muslim, not a stealth jihadist, an academic. He reviewed the cases I mentioned, the Ground Zero Mosque controversy, how it became a local issue, a national issue, an international issue due to media, the Sharia threat to America, a non-issue that now is one of the leading Republican presidential talking points that they used in 2012 and 2016 to get both votes and money. This is what he says, and this was published in the American Sociological Review. Quote, anti-Muslim bigots not only exerted powerful influence on media discourse about Muslims in the aftermath of 9/11 attacks, but ultimately became some of the most influential mainstream groups in the field. By 2008, these fringe organizations not only permeated the mainstream, but also forged vast social networks that consolidated their capacity to create cultural change, end quote. And last week, another poll was taken, and mashallah, 54% of Republican voters think President Obama, our brother, is a Muslim.
So in light of what you're talking about, someone here on our panel has had to deal directly with what some might call Islamophobia in the media. Yusufi, Vali, can you tell us a little bit about your community and how the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombings and then also the shooting of Osama Rahim, how did that impact your community, and did the media play into any of the after effects you faced?
So, in fact, in Boston, I'd argue that there wasn't a lot of Islamophobia post the Boston Marathon or the Osama Rahim shooting. And I think a lot of that had to do with some of the good work that had been done for really the last 6-7 years. So what happened with Ground Zero Mosque in New York actually was initially tested and tried in Boston, except I think in Boston we were able to succeed. But there was really a period from post 9/11 to 2007, 2008, where the ISBCC, the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center, was being built in really the heart of Boston and truly has become a symbol of Islam. So of course, when the marathon bombing happened, and just to refresh your memory, one of the brothers that would participate in the bomb used to attend a local Cambridge mosque, which also had a similar name to ours, because mosques don't tend to have very creative names, Islamic Society of Boston. And so obviously what happened was there was just a flood of media. You know, within probably about 24 hours, I know in front of the ISBCC, there's close to about 25, 30 reporters just hounding us, and the same thing in front of the Cambridge Mosque. And the number of emails we got, and Imam Sahib, who was our imam at that time, the number of emails we got was just overwhelming. So I think the first kind of decision we made in terms of trying to tackle the marathon bombing and trying to do our best to ensure that it didn't go into a negative spiral against the Muslim community was we made an intentional decision that we needed to step up to the plate and speak. Because if we weren't going to speak for ourselves, someone else for sure was going to speak for us. And secondly, we began to see it as an opportunity to talk about who we were as a Boston community. So fortunately, through some help from experts and really Imam Sahib's guidance, and may Allah protect him, he deserves a lot of credit for this, we began to communicate a very specific narrative that I think ended up being quite successful. So the first piece of this was the media kept on coming to us as the other. So the conservative media kept on saying to us, would ask us questions like, how are you connected to the perpetrators? You know, tell us, what are your links? With the liberal media, they kept on asking us, are you concerned about Islamophobia, discrimination? Which is very interesting because every other Bostonian that would be asked about this would be asked, was your family involved in this? Did you have any friends? Where were you during this time? So we were already, by both the liberals and the conservatives, positioned as the other. And what we were trying to do was reposition ourselves as Bostonians. So when they asked us those questions, you know, are you concerned about Islamophobia? You know, as a Bostonian Muslim, what I'm most concerned about is the victims of this horrific tragedy, the families and friends affected. And sure enough, from our mosque, there were people that were there at the marathon. So speaking as a Bostonian first was kind of a critical piece in handling this. The two other points were we saw this as an opportunity to convey our message. And so when they'd ask us about who we were as Bostonian Muslims or as a mosque, we would answer as, you know, we're an American Muslim institution that's committed to an authentic understanding of Islam that's rooted in values of compassion, mercy, service, and a commitment to America. I mean, and that's in fact the vision of our mosque, or the mission of our mosque, to teach and live Islam in America. So that was, and we would try to teach that point through personal narrative, as well as through the things that actually happened in the community, whether it was the sandwich drives, the ESL language courses at our mosque that, you know, served the whole community. That was the second point. And then the third piece, we would send a very Bostonian message, which was that we're Boston strong and that we aren't going to allow the acts of these individuals to divide us, that we're going to stand united. Unfortunately, because of the relationships that have been built over the years with interfaith leaders, with political leaders, most of them were very disciplined in holding to that message. And so the backlash in Boston, frankly, in spite of all these things, has been very, very minimal. And in fact, strangely, the marathon bombing actually allowed us to deepen our relationships with the media, and they got to actually come and see our mosque and see our community, and we invited them for khutbahs and, you know, just to be with the community. So that's how we've tried to handle things in mosque.
All right, thank you so much, Yusufi. Sort of to tie things together, I'd like to ask Mehdi Hasan to give us some insight into whether the media influences political discourse.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I too am very pleased to be sitting behind this podium with the best view of the hall. I'm going to start with a story. Forgive me all if you've heard this story, but George Bush, when he was president, the joke goes that he was holding a big event at the White House, big diplomatic dinner, world leaders from around the world, and a diplomat from a European country, he sees Bush and Tony Blair sitting in the corner, just whispering to each other. So he goes over in the corner, he says, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, everyone's over there. What are you doing here in the corner? What are you whispering about? And they look at each other, and then they look at this guy, they look at the diplomat, and Bush says, we're planning World War III. And the diplomat says, World War III? Wow, that sounds bad. What's it going to involve? And Bush says, we're going to kill 14 million Muslims and one dentist. The diplomat says, one dentist? Why would you kill one dentist? And Bush smiles, he looks at Blair, he said, I told you no one would ask about the Muslims. And The problem is we live in an age where no one asks about the Muslims. Politicians can say whatever they want in private or in public, and no one asks about the Muslims. And why does no one ask about the Muslims? Why do politicians across Europe, the West, United States, Canada, Australia, why do they think they can say anything they like? Why do they think they can speak about the Muslim community in a way that they would never dream of, never dare of speaking about any other minority community or faith community? Because fundamentally, as Wajahat outlined, as Dalia mentioned, my profession, my industry, the media, journalists have failed to hold them to account, have failed to call them out in a way they would call them out if they made racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic remarks. When it comes to Islamophobic remarks, journalists are too busy deciding whether it even exists to bother to call out a politician who says something outrageous about a Muslim institution, a Muslim individual, a Muslim act of faith. And so you have this growth now. It's a growth industry. Wajahat mentioned what's happened to the Republican Party. You know, the economist John Kenneth Galbraith, during the Bush presidency, he said, I look at George W. Bush and I yearn for Ronald Reagan. And I look at the current candidates. You look at the Ted Cruzes and the Mike Huckabees and the Donald Trumps, and you yearn for George W. Bush. Because George W. Bush went to a mosque 4 days after 9/11 in Washington, D.C. and said, Islam is peace. I did a debate in Oxford on the same motion, whether Islam is peace, and hundreds of people in Oxford University, liberals, voted no, it's not a religion of peace. So George Bush is better on that issue than a lot of people today, especially in the media industry and especially in the Republican Party. And so you have to ask this question, how will we get to this stage where journalists are not just turning a blind eye to Islamophobic discourse, Islamophobic bigotry, Islamophobic dog whistles from mainstream politicians, people who are running for the most powerful office in the world. They're not just turning a blind eye, but in many cases they're egging them on. They're inciting them. They are inciting Islamophobia and encouraging politicians to get their support, to get the support of their readers and their viewers by engaging in this stuff. And you look at politicians, there are many politicians, you look at their records, you look at someone like Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich, 20 years ago, didn't care about Islam. Newt Gingrich only cared about taxes. Newt Gingrich cared about cutting taxes and cutting the size of government. Today, Newt Gingrich is a man who only compared, he compared Islam to Nazism, I think, during the Ground Zero Mosque. Because they see there are votes in it, they see there are bloggers who will write about them positively, they see that they'll get invited on Fox News. You know more than I do. In the United States, the easiest way, the most obvious way in which the media incites Islamophobia and incites politicians to go down the Muslim bashing route is on cable news, is on Fox News. You only need to look at the underdogs debate. Did anyone see the presidential candidates underdogs debate last month? What was called the kids' table debate, I believe, for those people who didn't make the main cut with the serious candidates like Donald Trump. In the underdogs debate, the Fox News anchor said to the candidates, what would you do to battle radical Islam? How far would you go? Would you monitor mosques? Of course, mosques already are being monitored, as we found in New York. George Pataki, moderate governor of New York State, former moderate governor, not a Tea Party guy. Pataki jumps up and says, I'd shut mosques down. No one asked you to shut them down, George, but he says, I'll shut them down. Fox wants to know if I'm going to monitor them. I'm going to tell Fox, I'm going to shut them down. Would he ever say he would shut down a church or a synagogue without evidence of anything? Would he dream of even thinking it, let alone saying it on a national television platform? Senator Lindsey Graham. How many of you are aware of Senator Lindsey Graham? A man who has never come across a Muslim-majority nation he didn't want to invade, bomb, or occupy with other people's children. Lindsey Graham, a man who recently said, by the way, that anything in the Middle East that starts with al is bad news. Anything that starts with al. Algebra. Lindsey Graham says in the Fox News debate, he does this, you can watch it on YouTube, he says this. I don't know if it's a kind of declaration, a kind of pistol. He says, if I have to monitor mosques, I'll monitor mosques. These guys see the discourse. They see what's out there. Wajahat mentioned money as well, the money that goes into the Islamophobia industry, the media discourse that promotes it, and the politicians who follow in line. And it's very easy for us to identify this stuff. The bigger issue is, what are we doing to take back that narrative? It's not easy. There are no silver bullets. I shouldn't say the word bullet at a Muslim conference, I apologize. But what are we doing about it? It's very easy to slam Fox News. It's very, very easy to slam Lindsey Graham. But these guys are getting away with their stuff. The Mike Huckabees, the Ted Cruzes, the Bobby Jindals. Oh, Bobby Jindal. A man so proud of his culture and heritage that he used Fair and Lovely for a painting of him when he was governor of his great state. Bobby Jindal, who says that Muslims in my country, the UK, are creating no-go zones. I think Muslims should set up no idiot zones and keep Bobby Jindal out. But that's a different debate. Why do people like Jindal and Cruz and Huckabee, all these guys, why do they think that they can get away with this stuff? Because there's no countervailing pressure. If you are only pressured from one side, as a politician, you will do that one thing. Where is the countervailing pressure? Not just from Muslims, but from the left, from progressives, from people who care about racial equality. Where is that countervailing pressure where we're willing to stand up and take a stance? Look at what's happening with Trump and the Hispanic community. How many of you saw a couple of days ago peaceful protesters outside that beautiful piece of architecture that is the Trump Tower in Manhattan, standing, and they got punched by Trump's security guards? And Jorge Ramos, Hispanic journalist, thrown out of a press conference by Trump because the Hispanic community saying, we're not going to tolerate this from a guy who wants to be president, who's the leading candidate. And I wonder about us as a Muslim community. MashaAllah, you've come out here to Chicago, you've come to ISNA, you come year in, year out. But where is the momentum outside of these halls? Where is it out in the cities and towns and villages, the smaller states, that we can actually say politically we're going to get together and put on some of this pressure? Because we talk about the media discourse. The media discourse is one element. The lobbying element is another element. We Muslims, we know this. You don't need me to tell you this. You come to these conferences, you hear this year in, year out, that these are the areas where we need to up our games. Because the invaluable work that can be done to stop the very dangerous people who are coming down the road. I mean, I've just moved to the United States. You think I want to move back to the UK as soon as Donald Trump becomes president? I don't. It's not easy moving house. But this is a serious threat. These people with their discourses egged on by journalists. Franklin Delano Roosevelt met with a group of labor union leaders in the 1930s during the New Deal era who said that he wasn't going far enough when it came to workers' rights. And they laid out what they wanted him to do. And FDR responded to this group of labor leaders. He said, I agree with you. I want to do it. Now go and make me do it. Make me do it. Because there are decent politicians out there. Don't buy into that myth that all politicians are the same. Don't buy into that myth that all journalists are the same. There are decent people out there. There are non-bigoted people out there. There are people who don't agree with this toxic discourse. But maybe they're slightly afraid to take a stand. Maybe they think, if I come out as a politician, there are no votes in this. Maybe as a journalist, they think, if I come out and say this, no one's going to read my stuff. We need to be the people who are there giving support to those non-bigoted journalists, to those non-bigoted politicians, and saying, we're here, we've got your back. And you know what? We want to win this battle, we're not going to win it alone. There's no way Muslims are going to win anything on their own. We have to build alliances, and we have to get stuff done by putting the pressure on and making them do it. Thank you very much for your time.
So now I'd like to kind of open this up for all of you guys to jump in and offer your input. Mehdi did touch up on that, there are some solutions, there are things that we can do as Muslims, but I'm just curious, we've all had maybe positive and negative experiences interacting with the media, whether we work in it or have been featured in it. What are some of the solutions that we can do to counter some of the stories? Are we not media savvy enough? I mean, we always say, we need to get into careers in media and entertainment. We're only doing, engineering and medicine. Is that really the solution?
So I'm going to make a big disclaimer. I'm an academic. I'm a professor. I get invited on TV. So I can't speak to it as a practitioner. But I think one of the biggest responsibilities we have as Muslim Americans is to actually know our history, as Brother Wajahat said a little while ago, to know our history and our legacy in this country, not just, for example, that Muslims have served in every war since the Civil War, but to actually know the history of the discourse on Muslim identity in this country. The question of whether a Muslim can be president or whether President Obama is a Muslim didn't just arise now, right? This is not a recent phenomenon. In 1788, during the ratification of the Constitution of this country, William Lancaster, a delegate from North Carolina, comes and says, we need to put a religious litmus test in the Constitution. He says, I have not the art of divination. Maybe a papist, a Catholic, a Muslim might occupy that chair. He says a Mohammedan. That chair he's talking about was actually the seat of the presidency of the United States. They wanted to put a religious litmus test that only a Protestant could become the president. And so here, in the ratification of the Constitution of this country, opens a huge debate about what about the Muslims? Can a Muslim be president? What is the identity of this country going to look like? And he says, we are forming a nation that we don't know what it's going to look like. So we need to be weary of this. And so the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists enter a huge debate of what is this country really going to look like? And what is the conclusion? That there would be no religious litmus test. And it forces the Federalists to actually say a Muslim could be president because this is a nation based on religious neutrality. Just like Brother Mehdi said, there is so much opportunity and possibility. Don't think the cards are stacked against you. If in the ratification of the Constitution of this country was a heated debate about what about the Muslims, and they actually conclude that a Muslim could be president one day, then we owe it not just to ourselves, not just to the legacy of this country, but to the future of this nation, to know our history, to understand that we live in a world where sometimes it feels like everything is falling apart, where we have, for example, a prison industrial complex that is incarcerating people at a faster rate than it ever has, that there's structures of injustice that can only be addressed by a population that truly understands what the principles of Sharia really mean. And that population is you and I. That we really understand what does it mean to actually think about ethical principles that drive my life and yours. Ethical principles that will help us not just serve our local community, but serve this country, because not only do we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to this nation. SubhanAllah, as Muslims, we are the only people who are not just have a religious obligation, but a civic duty to live a life that's in service. One of my colleagues at the University of Seattle concluded a study that says the more mosque-going a Muslim is, the more civic-minded they are. The more mosque-going. Another one of my advisors at Princeton University just concluded a study that is published in one of the top sociology journals. And she finds that not just Quran reading, but Quran understanding, people who actually understand what the values of our faith really mean, are more civic-minded. What that means is that the things that ail this country, the things that we make us think, oh, we're going down a wrong direction, where there's a narrative that is so disgusting for us to watch, the current Republican presidential primary, that the solutions for it might actually lie in a community that wants to move beyond rhetoric, wants to move beyond that, and actually imbibe a country with ethical principles. It wouldn't have been the case if the debate on the ratification of the Constitution didn't ensure that Muslims had to be part of the fabric of this country, part of the political fabric, all the way to the seat of the presidency of the United States.
And that's a very interesting point to make, that we should know our own history here in this country. And I think that's something that I personally overlook to think about, to sort of validate our existence, pretty much.
So this is a point in the program where I transform into a Wajahat uncle. And this is my time where I give us a dant and a thappar. And if you don't know what a dant and thappar is, just ask the Desi uncle to the left and right of you. Problems and solutions. Let me give you a fascinating study that was done about American Muslims that came out in 2001. They said that 90% of American Muslims who were polled fit into 4 vocations. All right? The first one, want to take a guess? What's the highest maqam of American Muslim? What's the Jannati maqam? Doctor. Second, anyone want to take a guess? Engineer, smart crowd. Third, businessman, somehow, mashallah, makes a lot of money, buys a Lexus, and gets a nice white picket fence, 2.4 kids, and a wife. Fourth, taxi service. Okay? So that's 90%. That leaves 10% for lawyers, professors, journalists, therapists, politicians. Give me some more. Artists, 10%. If you are not writing your story is being written by someone else for you. If you are not writing your story is being written by someone else for you. And the story of American Islam, American Muslims, we have not emerged as the protagonists of our own narrative despite the immense privileges that we have in this country. We have to be very grateful. We, mashallah, are very privileged people who are able to shell out some money to come to ISNA or, borrow, quote unquote, steal our friend's pass when he wasn't looking and come to this conference. What are we doing with these immense privileges? We have not emerged as the protagonists of our narrative, we have emerged as the global antagonists of a narrative where Islam is pitted against the West. And you know what? I don't mind being an antagonist. Because sometimes antagonists, at least they make a mark. Like Joker is a villain, but at least Joker has a personality. You know what's worse than being an antagonist? Being a sidekick. Being Haji Baba. Being Sulu. Even though they were awesome, by the way. You know what's worse than being a sidekick? Being a footnote. Being forgotten. You're so pathetic and so impotent that you don't even get to come on stage. You don't even dress up. You're just on the sideline selling chaat and chai, which is awesome. But you don't get to be in the spotlight because you reject the spotlight. Because let's be honest, this is what happens in pretty much every Muslim community I've ever visited, and we've been to many Muslim majority communities, Mehdi and I. What's one of the top major villains of any Muslim community? The media. So this is what happens. I'm Pakistani. I can make fun of Pakistanis. You can't if you do, you're racist. But most Pakistani uncles around the world say this: Beta, I was watching this Salah Haramzada Bill O'Reilly on Fox News. This Salah, Bill O'Reilly, did you listen to what he said about Muslims and Islam? Astaghfirullah. Drinking chai, turn the channel. I say, uncle, interesting. What are you doing to change the narrative? You have two sons. One of them, mashallah, is actually very gifted. I read a short story of his. Are you encouraging him to become a writer? Beta, writing is a good hobby. Writing is a good hobby. Facebook posts, fantastic. Blogging, schlogging, zabardast. My beta will become a doctor. And I always ask people this. Look, there's some positives here, and I want to give a dant, and I also want to leave you with some hope. Who is the best-selling poet in America right now? Anyone know? Rumi. Rumi is the best-selling poet in America, a man who lived 800 years ago in Konya, Turkey, who wrote in Farsi, who was a Muslim scholar, all right? He was uber-Muslim. And based on his love for Allah and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his sheikh or his friend, Shamsud Tabriz, the pain and love of that union produced the Mathnavi, which is the best-selling poetry which heals hearts of all people today in America. That's profound. Actually, we should give that a round of applause. And what I ask people this, I ask uncles this, I ask aunties this, I ask friends this, where are our Rumis? Where is the Rumi of Chicago? Where is the Rumi of London? Where is the Rumi of Fremont? Where is the Rumi of Nashville? How many Rumis have we lost in our communities to becoming second-rate or third-rate engineers? How many Rumis have we forfeited to become second-rate doctors who fulfill the checklist of success? Doctor degree, yes. Nice college, yes. Six-figure degree, yes. Nice house, yes. Mashallah. I'm 45 years old, Dari, Hajj, Facebook photos, yes. Son comes along, repeat. It's fantastic. You have achieved the American dream, mashallah. But what have you forfeited? And the reason why I mention this is we have privileges in this community where you can be a great many things. In America, we have the privileges where you can be like Mehdi. You can be. You weren't a TV presenter. What was your original? What did you graduate in?
Am I being interviewed now?
Yeah, what would you graduate?
Political science?
Political science. You can have a political scientist like Mehdi who was behind the scenes, who now, mashallah, just premiered his new show up front on Al Jazeera English, where he interviews Edward Snowden. You have a guy like me who was an English major because I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. Got the English degree, moved back home, was poor and broke, decided to go do a law degree because that was expecting me. With the law degree, moved back, couldn't get a law job, was being a lawyer during the day, blogger at night, writing because I realized, you know what, I want to tell my story and somehow, inshallah, I think I can make it. And using the power of social media, which we all have, injected my voice into the mainstream. And alhamdulillah, fast forward with a lot of luck and du'as, I'm on TV. The fact I'm on TV means either Allah exists or He doesn't exist. It's up to you to decide. But point I'm trying to say is we have the privileges, and you can either be a spectator or you could be a participant. And I'm tired. I'm tired of Muslim Americans whining about the media. I'm tired of always sitting there crying and complaining. The legacy that I want to give to my 1-year-old child, Ibrahim, is, oh, we're great victims. Oh, we suffer really well, Ibrahim. MashaAllah. Look at us. We're martyrs. I want him to throw down as a participant in the ring. I want him to be a baller. I want Ibrahim to ball out in America as an American Muslim. Why not Ibrahim? Why not my son? Why not a Pakistani American Muslim? And how come our narrative, and I want to just end this. Look, Teddy Roosevelt had a quote. I just researched this for you guys. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. All right? Throw down in the arena. Become a participant. Do not be a spectator. You have 4 people here who do not have remarkable lives, aren't remarkable people, who alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted with privileges, yes, but America accepts us. I'm on television. I get to write a narrative and a story and people listen to it. And as Mehdi said, and I want to give us some hope here, there are good people in America. People don't have a malicious hate towards Islam and Muslims, they just don't know any better. 60% of Americans say they don't know a Muslim, and what they do know about Islam and Muslims, what is what they get from the media. So who's going to tell them about Muslims? Why not you? And check this out. This was a best-selling book, huge book in America. I'm going to give you some quotes about this book. It was about immigrant community. The book warned that this community is a profound threat to democracy, equality, and secular values. They will not be integrated. They have established parallel societies that want to impose their belief on Americans. It is an undemocratic system of alien control. They're outbreeding the Americans. They seek a plan for America. They seek a Muslim republic, a Muslim plan. You know who said that? Paul Blanchard. What year? 1949. What was the book? American Freedom and Catholic Power. Replace Muslim with Catholic. That was one of the best-selling books in America in 1949. And then it was republished in 1958 and mashallah became a bestseller again. If 50 years ago you told Americans that a Catholic would become president or a Catholic would be in Supreme Court, people will laugh at you. If 15 years ago, if they said that the #1 daytime talk show host would be an out lesbian woman married to a woman, me living in the Bay Area said, no way, would not happen. Who is the #1 talk show host in America? Ellen DeGeneres. If they told me 10 years ago, and I'm born and raised in this country, that a man named Barack Hussein Obama would be elected twice to the highest office in the land, I said, not in America, we're not ready. And mashallah, our brother Barack Hussein just threw down with 2 terms. So have hope. Have hope. Have hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us privileges. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us successes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a remarkable opportunity in America. And do not be a victim, do not be a victim, do not be a victim, do not be a spectator. Throw down in the arena, throw down in the ring, share your story. Thank you for listening to me.
So we have about 10 minutes left, but Yusuf, did you want to add on to this?
Add very quickly, I think Wajahat spoke at the individual level. I think we also need that at an institutional level, where our institutions are being built such that they're truly a benefit to the communities that they live in. So Iman, I think, is a wonderful example of that. And I think particularly our mosques, which at least in the American civic landscapes are seen as the first symbol of Islam, I think they have to get out of the walls and start to, essentially we need imams coming out of the mosque, because that's really often the first experience, the first lived experience of people of other faiths towards Muslims.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just briefly, just picking up on the previous comments, years ago, I used to give lots of talks about the media and getting involved in the media. And now I've kind of slightly changed my pitch. And while I agree with everything Wajahat said, I just want to clarify one thing, because a lot of you might be thinking, well, I am a doctor, I am an engineer, and he just insulted my profession. No, I'm joking. But, people are doing great jobs and great professions from across the board. And the point I think we're all trying to make here is that we all have a role to play. And that is the key point to take away. If you are a writer, if you are an artist, fine. We need to be able to tell our stories. Is a very important point. In the Muslim community, we have left arts and culture way behind for far too long, when that is the most influential way of changing the narrative. You want to talk about how homophobia was defeated in America? It was defeated on TV sitcoms. It was defeated on TV dramas. That is how you change people's hearts and minds. And therefore, we need to talk much more about arts and culture and about communication in general. But my point is a much more broader point, which is that everyone has a role to play. The key statistic to take away from today, in my view, is the 60%. The 60% of Americans don't know a Muslim. So what are we doing to turn that statistic around? They're not going to do it. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, we, the minority, whether we like it or not, it's not fair, it's not just, but tough. It's on us to turn that statistic around and build those relationships. We think that knowing all the arguments or knowing all the facts and figures works. I used to be under that illusion for years. I went through school, university, work. I know more than the next guy. I'll have more facts and figures than the next guy. And it's great for performance. It's great for theater. You can win debates. You can look good in interviews. But it doesn't actually work in changing people's minds. All the evidence, all of the academic evidence shows, from behavioral economics, from psychology, from social sciences, that the way you change people's minds is not by sending them a barrage of facts and figures and statistics. It's by building a relationship with them. That is how you break down barriers and break down walls. The way you do that is by building relationships across communities, between institutions, between individuals, between professions. That is the only way we are going to win this battle against bigotry, against suspicion, against Islamophobia. Literally, if it has to be done this way, one American, one Briton, one Frenchman, one European at a time. But it's on us to do that, to build those relationships and change people's minds.
Just one last point I'd like to make, and if you guys want to address this, it's sort of like devil's advocate here. As someone myself in the media, I notice whenever there are stories where we need to get in touch with someone from the Muslim community, for example, a friend of mine at the Associated Press was looking for someone to follow for Hajj. They wanted to do a positive story, and yet nobody responded. And this is a common theme I've seen over and over. You reach out to the Muslim community, either A, they're suspicious and they think you're going to turn the story around, or B, you're a Muslim reporter, we'll get back to you when we can, and then the deadline's passed and you've lost your chance. So what are your thoughts on this? Is this part of the problem?
So I work at Al Jazeera America, Mehdi works at Al Jazeera English, and it's a great question you asked. Look, oftentimes people say, show me tangible proof that working in the media can change the narrative. I'll show you a tangible proof. As Mariam said, you have breaking headline, breaking stories. Everyone's running around like crazy. Your line producer comes and says, listen, something's happening in Syria. A photo's gone viral. We want to talk to Syrian American Muslim community about how they're helping. Hey, does anyone know a Syrian American Muslim community? Look around their newsroom. It's an ocean of whiteness, right? In Al Jazeera America, by virtue of sometimes being the token, I've been the token Muslim and the token Pakistani all throughout my life. Mehdi has, I'm sure, Yusuf, Dalia, I'm sure, Mariam, you always have been.
I've never been a token Pakistani.
He's an Indian, we'll forgive him. Inshallah, may Allah protect you and preserve you. I'm just kidding, I'm not. But by virtue of being that sole Muslim sometimes in the newsroom, this is what happens. And by being good at your job, do the best, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has talented you with, whatever you work at, be the best that you can be. Because then people respect you, all right? Work hard. But Mehdi said, I really like what he said. It sucks. Life sucks. Boo-hoo, Islamophobia. Guess what? That's our challenge. So you have to work. You see, the hardest, this is what I always do. I'm in the room, either I'm in the newsroom or I'm in a speech. I say, who's the hardest worker? That guy, I'm gonna work harder than that person. Who's the smartest person? That person, I'm gonna pretend I'm smarter than that person. Who's the fastest person? I'm gonna be 2 steps faster than that person. Who's the funniest person? I'm gonna be wittier than that person. It sucks, but you have to be it. But if you actually become a professional in the newsroom and people respect you, this is what happens. And you're a Muslim. Wajahat, I know you're active in the Muslim communities. Hey, what do you think about this story? That, you know, is a very stereotypical take, guys, on the Syrian Muslim story. Why don't you put this angle? Word, you say this angle is more authentic? Yeah, we're gonna go with that. Number one, you just change the framing of the story, number one. Number two, Wajahat. We have 4 white guys lined up as panelists to talk about Syria. No offense to white guys. Do you by any chance know Syrian Muslims? I'm like, well, yes I do. Now, on the flip side, Maryam says, what's the community response? And Mehdi said, listen guys, I'm not in the media, I'm just an engineer, I'm just, you know, a salesman, I'm just this and that. You guys can reach out to your local community, and you should, and be like, hey, anytime you guys need someone on X, Y, and Z, I'm your guy. Or also, yeah, I have one more point, but the Indians always take Pakistani stuff, so I'm having fun. I love Indians, some of my best friends are Indians. All hail Hyderabadi biryani.
I'm still waiting for Wajahat to be the wittiest person in the office. That day hasn't come yet. Just to deal with Maryam's specific question, it was a very important question, and I sympathize with this question because I have seen so many Muslims destroyed when they've tried to work with media organizations, and there's every right to be suspicious of media organizations. Journalists will exploit you, journalists will use you, it's a fact. And what do you do about it? And I think there's 2 points. One is, work with Muslims who are in the media. Use us. There are people on this panel, there are people at these conferences. You know, when you meet people, try and get their contact. Use us. I'm here. I've helped a lot of people, and I'm happy to help other people. You know, if you have doubts, when I was in the UK, a lot of people came to me and said, I remember a mosque in Britain was approached about doing some kind of reality show. They came to me, should we do it? Should we not do it? What do you think? And by virtue of the fact that I used to work at that TV company, I was able to say, you can trust this guy, you shouldn't trust that guy, this is what you should ask for, this is what you should stay away from. So use the talents in our community, use the people, just like you would go to a doctor to ask for a medical opinion. If you're getting involved in media projects, get a media advisor. If you're getting involved in academic projects, use the academics and the universities out there. Use the people in different walks of life. Use these conferences to network. As a community, we're so bad at leveraging the talent and resources in our community, at networking, at being able to kind of contact people we've met and say, how can I help you? How can you help me? How can we help our community? Instead, we're very defeatist or we're very cynical. When it comes to the media, it's either, oh, well, Mehdi, Wajahat, all these guys who are working in the media, well, they're all controlled by the Jews and the Zionists. That's one attitude. It's all a conspiracy. Or it's a kind of, those guys, they're doing good work, but what difference can 2 guys make? The media is so powerful, we can't do anything. And I do wonder, what would have happened had people like us been around at the time of the Prophet? It would have been like, what's that guy Muhammad doing, the Quraysh? Way too powerful. We can sit at home, drink chai and complain and change the channel. And that is the problem here. Yes, be suspicious. Yes, be cautious. But also reach out to people and try and build alliances. And don't be defeatist. Because if you're defeatist, you'll be defeated.
Maryam, the question Maryam has, you reveal many of the fears and paranoia that exist, right? And it's tough. For Mehdi and I, not just as Muslims, but sometimes when you're in the newsroom, the first thing I notice is not that I'm the only Muslim, I notice that I'm the only person of color. And alhamdulillah, I've had some success, but I've had relations in Hollywood, in publishing, in theater, in media, and the first thing I still notice when you get to peer behind the curtain and see the wizards is that the wizards are mostly white men. Not that they're racist, but they're white. And oftentimes I'm like, oh, it's not that I'm the only Muslim, I'm the only person of color. So the challenges that we have are very real. However, what Mehdi says is don't be defeatist. I want to give you one example. Everyone, for better or worse, has a smartphone now. Everyone, for better or worse, has the power to enter a global conversation via Facebook or Twitter. Let me give you one example. It was a tragedy, it is a tragedy, that transformed in some small shape or way to something positive, if I can say that, even though those words are trite. Chapel Hill shooting, February. 3 young students in UNC, Dalia, Yusufi, and Hasan, executed and killed by Craig Stephen Hicks. I was on Twitter late at night, 2 a.m., as is my job. And on my Twitter feed, because I know a lot of Muslims, I see these faces of these two muhajjabas. I'm like, oh, these young women, why do they keep showing up on my Facebook feed, on my Twitter feed? And little by little, I find out from some Muslims in North Carolina that these 3 Muslims were killed. And then later on, I find out, well, how come no one in mainstream media is covering this? And in the local community in North Carolina, the local North Carolinian Muslims started using social media and a hashtag Chapel Hill shooting to try to get the attention of mainstream media. Now, because alhamdulillah I'm privileged and in mainstream media, I was able to capture this and send an email to my editors and say, hey, this is a story that we should concentrate on. But because of a grassroots organic movement by American Muslims using the hashtag Chapel Hill shooting, a story that otherwise perhaps 5 years ago no one would have talked about became an international headline. And 3 victims became our 3 winners. And our 3 winners, alhamdulillah, that tragic, senseless murder has transformed in some way into something good, where people say these were human beings, they belong to communities, they are not just victims, they had lives, their lives had a positive impact, their communities have a positive impact, and there's more to American Islam and to American Muslims than that's tragedy. There's also joy and hope and love, and alhamdulillah, if we can say alhamdulillah, based on that organic groundswell started by American Muslims to initiate this local story into the international headlines. Now we see, mashallah, Diaz, before he passed away, he was trying to raise money for a fund to go give dental relief to Syrian refugees. He just wanted $25,000. They raised more than $200,000. So alhamdulillah, have hope, have faith, inject yourself into the mainstream, be a participant, no longer be a spectator.
Well, thank you all to all of our panelists. Unfortunately, we are out of time, as much as I would like to keep this conversation going. And thank you for attending, and there are many more sessions to go to, so enjoy the rest of your afternoon.